So Gil, really, thank you for an opportunity to speak to yourself. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and address this industry work. See that's my computer being just a little bit quick. But thanks very much for an opportunity to meet with you, to talk with you, and your KerrEDC giving us an opportunity to speak to your shareholders, speak to your Chamber of Commerce. This is a good opportunity for us to get together and talk about what's possible in KerrEDC. It wasn't too long ago, Gil, that you and I spoke on a different panel focused on advanced manufacturing. It was with IEDC, the International Economic Development Council, focused on the conversation around advanced manufacturing and the appropriate applications of security to advanced manufacturing. I know that that industry is going through some changes, some advances, and that that whole process was taking the form of talking about advanced technologies supporting the next generation of manufacturing, the appropriate application of security metrics, work alignment, human capital needs that are going to be relevant and required to meet security demands. And we both know, and we mostly all know, that manufacturing is undergoing a conversion from digitization to digitalization. That conversation in manufacturing is being driven by the need to modernize some of their control systems, legacy or in the middle of that process. And driving that process, is a conversion. That process, not only do they need to modernize and integrate their control systems, but they also need to drive business value. Somebody say something? Okay, they need to drive business value. However, when you go through this conversion from legacy control systems, it means bringing on these newer, sort of more public-facing technologies. It could be a disruption, but they still have to go in that direction because they're looking to leverage business value, or that business value across the entire enterprise. And gaining that business value can actually mean the difference between surviving and or thriving. And so that panel that we spoke on had some relevance to today's conversation, and the steps that Kerrville is taking to develop an environment that fosters and develops growth of technically savvy workforce, and among other things that you're doing at your entrepreneurial center. And in our conversation, we'll be talking about how we can support some of the regional organizations and needs that they've identified and have yet to be identified, especially where it relates to their security, cybersecurity, and those kinds of things. And KerrVille sees the opportunity to enable and empower their city, their communities, and their residents, and they're taking the lead in developing these locally based, homegrown, tech-savvy workforce residents to support the attraction of corporations to their community. So empowering those residents with business skills, with communication skills, and technology skills, well, that's the thing to do. So I know that some of the things that we're going to talk about is what's the need, sort of a brief agenda. We may get to all of them, we may not get to all of them, but I know we'll have a lot of questions that'll just come up in the whole process sort of lays out. What's the need for strategic alignment? What are the workforce trends that are affecting workforce alignment? What is COVID, the big elephant in the room, what has COVID taught the industry? I've inserted some words here from some partners that I've spoken to in the industry, and just start looking at some addressing the strategic workforce approach, and have some examples of where security has gone wrong. And so the question always comes back, and you've already seen the word. Why the need, and what's the need for this workforce alignment to align with business skills? And as I did just put up there quickly, the shift just happens, and when the shift happens, my computer is just going quickly. And when the shift happens, some of the things that we always notice is that it happens in such a way that we were either prepared or not prepared. And so what did we do to make ourselves and get ourselves prepared? What do we do to prepare for an event, whether it's a pandemic event like COVID, whether it's a economic upturn or a downturn, whether it's a breach? What is it that we've done? Last night I had an opportunity to speak to a chief operating officer from one of the largest banks, national bank, and he was telling me specifically about his particular organization's security workforce, that they were just not prepared for this event of COVID. And what it did is it illustrated and it illuminated and really highlighted a lot of their weak points or their shortcomings with their internal staff, with their relationship with their third-party vendors, their outsourced resources. And so the challenge became pretty clear that organizations, and this is a pretty big organization and indicative across all organizations, that they were not just prepared for this kind of event, but COVID did open up his budget dramatically. And so he was able to spend liberally, and still is able to spend somewhat liberally, to remedy or right size, if you will, and adjust some of the challenges that they saw. One of the things he mentioned specifically was this idea of supply and demand, right? And he said, Dave, the one thing that we see is that the security community or the security apparatus is just not producing the right amount, or the right amount of, and the properly skilled staff to meet the demand, to meet the market demand. So I said to him, well, tell me why you're experiencing that. He says, well, when we search for and we look for, we can't seem to find the right individuals. We're running out of, we're not seeing the right folks coming through with the right skills, the right complement of skills, and more so, they're looking for folks that have the ability to not only be a specific specialist, but also a team player. And being a team player helps grow the organizational capabilities around security, not just focus on what you do and in your area. A colleague of mine said that you need to be able to understand how your role is relevant to the business goals of the organization. So we said, follow the money, and you can always follow and find out where you're most effective and where you can be most useful. But we've seen that from workforce trends that there are workforce trends that are affecting what we're doing or what we're attempting to do in cybersecurity. And one of those things is that we're really running out of the real trained talent. We're not seeing the trained talent, or the trained talent is not apparent. And that talent shortage is really creating a challenge in the industry. And that problem is manifesting itself not only in finding the right folks, but individuals like the gentleman I spoke to last night said, we know that cyber threat is going to increase and intensify in regularity, but we also know that there's a challenge finding and attracting and hiring experienced cybersecurity staff, especially those with the proper communications, business, and technology skills. And so I wanted to spend a few minutes just going over what the labor force is going through, and then address some workforce trends there. And that we have a shortage. We know that that shortage is being impacted by the ability to bring the right teams to the table. You know that that industry partners are not taking the chance in hiring the folks that are not skilled. And then you add to that what I consider this newly polished social impact elephant in the room. It's not so new, it's been here, but it's newly polished, and that's diversity, inclusion, equity, and the like. And like most issues, every global issue that's facing us from a social impact perspective includes some equity, inclusion, and the addressing of the digital divide, if you will. I always say that digital divide is a factor, but it is likely to be a factor that can represent and present a solution to the supply and demand shortage. I've always been deeply concerned about the human capital supply and demand element, and I think all industries can benefit from a broader conversation about broader dose of diversity and conversation about diversity. But I want to be clear, I'm not thinking about diversity for the sake of just admitting unqualified individuals into the ranks or lowering the bar or just having diversity for the sake of a quota or affirmative action. I just dated myself there. Affirmative action, but having having something in the vein of what KerrEDC is looking to do is providing access, right? Access to our marginalized communities, access to underserved communities, and providing that access coupled with training that emphasizes the ability to equip these practitioners that are coming online, these new practitioners, with the next generation of technology, the next generation of communication skills, hands-on functional training, experiential training, teaching them to be competent as we can possibly train them to be, qualified, and taking those diverse and non-traditional practitioners and bringing them into this warfare space, that is ongoing and ever growing. That kind of training is sort of a new thought process to training. It hasn't been around very long, where you have to spend most of your time doing what you're learning. I read once Aristotle said that for the things that we must learn to do before we do them, we have to learn them by doing them. And so this new level of training, which is more experiential, more hands-on, and more engaged and involved, can help bring about the change in training that brings folks into the space, bring them in with more knowledge, and bring them in with more understanding around business technology and business technology and communications. Just some background on workforce trends, right? We know that organizational alignment is a goal. We've learned and we've seen that COVID is something, a pandemic that can affect us in a very dramatic way of both our budgets and our workforce. We know that the event that these things, that COVID really was unprecedented and accelerating economic and social challenges and technological challenges. But even before COVID, even before the global pandemic, executive teams were pretty clear that they had a challenge protecting the networks that they were guarding, and the ability to protect those networks without degrading them or degrading the innovative and innovative spirit that manage those networks was always there and always a challenge for these organizations. These executives knew that they had to find the skills, they had to find the talent, and going through that process, they had to look everywhere to find those skills. There you go, everywhere to find those skills. COVID made one thing even more clear, and that's that technologically and human capital demands were changing faster than organizations could manage and could predict that they would change. So in response to COVID, the organizations transformed and they made changes, but those changes were at a risk for themselves. All right, so here's some of the trends that are affecting talent shortage. We know that we have an aging workforce. We know that we have some technologically changes, and we know we have qualified practitioners, a shortage of those qualified practitioners. I'll give you a statement from Manpower also that said that most companies have shown that they're experiencing a shortage of internal talent. So that shortage is likely to create some challenges for them internally, where their organizations are not properly staffed, and finding the right talent is also a challenge. So we already know this because we've sort of said that earlier on in this conversation. And we know that work shift reallocation is a problem. And it has raised its head in such a way that we haven't seen this kind of shift in literally several decades, since, of course, the screen is telling us that since World War II, we haven't seen this sort of in-demand skill shift from healthcare to information security, and it's happening at an unprecedented sort of scale. There's also a notice that I read about how job displacement is happening through technology automation and through technology displacement of opportunities across the globe. Give me 2 seconds here, please. I'm perspiring. I have the heat on in this house, right? And so we know that these changes are evident. We know that they're ongoing, and we know that they're going to continue. And it's our approach and our opportunity to really make changes in our approach. And one of the things I just wanted to illuminate here is that this is really a challenge for most organizations, this talent shortage, and finding the real opportunity to find the real individuals. And it's creating an exposure for groups from the point of consumer confidence, from investor confidence, from reputation risk, from having challenges with the regulators if an event you find yourself out of compliance. And so that risk and reputation, exposure and fines, legal activities, sanctions, and the like, all of these things represent a challenge for these organizations, for organizations that are going through this adjustment or alignment of their business initiatives to their staffing. Just a brief word from some of the industry folks that I've talked to. I want that to change good. The Human Capital Institute, there did change. The Human Capital Institute mentioned that not every organization is going through a challenge here. High-performing organizations have said that their external shortages are affecting them negatively. However, they're able to stem the tide because it's going to limit, not only is it going to limit their strategic goals, but this proportion drops to about 50%. I'm sort of reading this because it's a new slide that I brought up. But however, high-performing organizations have found a way to not be challenged by this human capital challenge. Other organizations have said that they can report that their skills internally are going to be a challenge for them. And so they're going to need to adjust their talent internally as well to meet their requirements. There's a couple more notices that I've read from Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is the Homeland Security CISA agency. Oh, goodness. So their approach has always been that there's not enough talent in the industry. Cybersecurity professionals are not being produced enough to meet the volume of the ever-changing network, of the ever-changing nature of cybersecurity. And it's being compounded by the fact that it takes such a long time for individuals to become trained in cybersecurity. And of course, we need to develop those skills, but we need to develop them adequately so they can meet the challenge. Of course, from a global perspective, I was reading that MIT has mentioned that between 2013 and 2021, the estimated growth of unfilled position has grown to about 3.5 million. That number varies depending on who you talk to. But one thing that was clear is we're yet fewer than 1 in 4 candidates applying for any of these positions are even qualified. So what's the approach that we should be taking? What kind of workforce planning should we be taking? And I was, had a conversation with a couple of folks about their approach. And they said that the most effective workforce planning that you can do, challenging, the most effective workforce challenging that you can do to build the proper team is to identify a effective planning structure or effective planning approach. I myself always suggest the deliberate approach of enabling organizations to go through an assessment of their data needs and what they need to execute an effective cybersecurity workforce planning model. And of course, that takes the approach of understanding what you do for your business. What is your primary goals? What is your primary business goals? And how do you assess the risk posture of your organization and the risk tolerance of your organization? So understanding those two things gives you an opportunity to gain insight into your organization and determine what do I need to do to avoid risk. And avoiding risk means whether you are able to accept uh, the potential uh, uh, accept the potential breach event or risk tolerance and say, well, if I'm going to have if I'm going to have a breach, at least I know what that breach is and I can handle and adjust it and adjust to it. And it won't negatively or adversely negatively affect the outcome of my business operations. So what I've seen is that, and what I've seen and have heard is that the risk planning approach really creates a baseline of your risk exposure, risk tolerance, and it gives you an idea of what you should be doing and how you should be structuring your organization, not only for today, your workforce for today, but your workforce for tomorrow. I've, written down a description here of risk exposure. It means to understand the level of cybersecurity that an organization can incur based on its mission, based on its operations, based on its structure, based on its team, based on its policies, procedures, and technology. And understanding all of those things, as well as your partnerships and your partner relationships, gives you an opportunity to better determine what your risk exposure is and how you should go about mitigating those risks. Also, if you have a level of risk tolerance, it helps you measure the organization's attitude toward and or the appreciation for risk. And how you should go through the process of absorbing that risk. All of these things that I'm saying now, all of the things that I'm alluding to now, are just focusing on the fact that an organization is going to have to make changes in their manpower, in their workforce, in order to adjust to their business initiatives. Business initiatives drives the business, and as part of that whole process of creating business initiatives, you should integrate the conversation about security and the human capital needs that you have into that product development, so that you can accurately and reasonably forecast what you're going to need and how you're going to need it. So there's a couple of questions, but I'm going to continue for a couple of minutes here, and then of course we can always circle back to talk about some of the questions you have. So the question about effective workforce planning always comes back to people, process, technology, and of course policies. And an effective workforce planning approach that allows you to competently or better align your workforce with your business missions is an opportunity to really take a good look at your supply and your demand, something that we already mentioned earlier in the conversation. It's an opportunity to identify if you have the right human capital internally, where that human capital will come from, and that's considered supply. That helps you to determine the future human capital requirements. The demand also helps you to be able to find where that talent is going to come from. Is it going to come from the educational institutions or the academic institutions that you work with? Is it going to come from the professional training field? Where will that supply come from? But effective workforce planning gives you an opportunity to really structure the approach. So that effective plan is an opportunity to really design your process, and it's a repeatable process. It's not something that should just happen once and happen in a sort of absentia. It's a repeatable process, and it's a reliable process. It helps you identify risk and predict need over time. It also helps you identify the potential risk areas associated with aligning to your workforce. So where is the support coming from, and is that support appropriate for what we're looking for? So done right, a workforce planning initiative allows organizations to adjust their resources and look into the future and plan according to their business initiatives, their work patterns, and make fundamental changes in how that whole workforce strategy alignment is done. I've also come across the idea that workforce planning consists of really three particular components: it's process, strategy, and it's the infrastructure. The process is always establishing an integrated and consistent means of diagnosing your workforce. The strategy always provides you with a direct line between your business and your workforce requirements. And it also gives you a shared vision into your governance and allows you to continually monitor the performance. And the infrastructure obviously speaks to how you're going to develop your whole sort of planning approach. So I've got on the screen a couple of things that I've noted is that this process takes a couple of steps. Of course, first, you've got to set strategic direction. You've got to analyze your workforce to understand where your gaps are and conduct that workforce analysis. The third step is developing an action plan. The fourth step is implementing that action plan. And all of these things are part and parcel to those three components that I mentioned, which is having a process, having a strategy, and understanding your infrastructure. And of course, lastly, you want to monitor and evaluate what you've done and continually revise that plan so that it continually meets your needs, your workforce needs over time. And in all of these things that I've said, also, it's important to mention that as you go through this process, looking at the communities that don't have access to the training and requirements that are necessary to render them totally capable should be part of your strategy. Should be looking as a community to where we can find those golden gems in our community and bring those golden gems in, train them as part of our process, as part of our workforce planning process, train them, add them to the process, teach them the business and communication and technology skills that are happening inside of our organizations on a regular basis. What happens when you don't? A colleague of mine sent me this information about a manufacturing organization that went through a disruptive breach that created some downstream challenges for them. They were hit with a ransomware attack. That ransomware attack took, I think, 50% of their production units offline. They're one of the world's largest aluminum manufacturing organizations, headquartered in Norway. Yet they had quite a few luxury car manufacturers that were depending on their aluminum. When they were hit with a ransom attack downstream, their manufacturers or their luxury car manufacturers could not take advantage of having the aluminum that they need. So their production sort of went down. They were not able to fulfill their orders to their customers. And so you can see that not having the proper workforce alignment to protect your organization from attacks like ransomware can have some devastating effects upstream and downstream. I was also reading about a upstream attack that Tesla experienced. Their camera manufacturer, security camera manufacturer, had a breach, and that breach enabled 150,000 cameras globally to be compromised. And so some of these cameras were looking into jails or prison systems, Tesla design factory, hospitals, police stations. And so not having the proper training, not having the proper team really created disruptions for these organizations, both in manufacturing and in some of our most emergency services units. And of course, Tesla, had a real big challenge with their design factory being looked into and seeing their intellectual property being breached. So I guess a good question for in this conversation is, what is a good business case for diversity in terms of our workforce alignment and workforce strategy? What's a good business case? The business case that I usually use is one that speaks to developing a holistic approach, if you will. Can I just go backwards? Holistic approach to developing a diverse community and a diverse workforce. Having a diverse workforce engenders greater innovation. Um, it gives your team a better opportunity to engage more productively. There are a lot of financial performance outcomes that come out of having a more diverse workforce. Your clients are a good reflection of your diversity. So if your services are being sold to a wide, diverse community, then having diversity is a good reflection of your interest and your commitment to the communities that you serve. And of course, employing diversity in your workforce always gives you the ability to attract talent, better talent, and top talent. Here are some key actions that I think that, let's jump ahead there. Here's some key actions. I got to apologize about my computer jumping ahead. Here's some things that I think that we should be doing in terms of key actions. Really, I apologize there. I always say, look, don't boil the ocean. Don't boil the ocean when you're trying to prioritize on security and diversity aligning with your business initiative. Don't boil the ocean. You know, be real focused and be real clear about your objectives and your goals and what you're trying to accomplish. Always look to, provide access to those that are in need. Align your business goals with your workforce development, your workforce strategy, and your diversity strategy, and engage as many folks as you can and need to in this process. It's a collective sort of environment, and it's a full holistic environment. And when you look across doing workforce development or strategic workforce development with business goals and business initiatives, it's a broad conversation that you're having with a lot of elements. But again, you don't have to do everything and do everything in a boil the ocean approach. Just prioritize, create access, create alignment, and then engage. I've looked at a couple of models, if you will, from across the country on how this is being done in other communities. I selected one from the city of Newark, New Jersey, that I'm pretty familiar with. They have what they call a NAC program, and NAC is an acronym for Newark Anchor Collaborative. Similar to what the city of Kerrville is doing, they're collaborating with all of their industry partners to create this sort of collaborative that connects the regionally based communities, hospitals, education systems, the entire ecosystem to support the development of both entrepreneurs and qualified staff, or qualified community, if you will, or a savvy community. In doing that, collaboration between the community, or in Kerrville's case, between the entrepreneurial center that they're developing and their regional partners, the focus is on creating that smart net intelligent workforce so that workforce can benefit the industry partners in the region. There'd be no need for any of the regional partners in Kerrville to attract folks from outside or try to attract folks from outside of the community if those same resources were available inside of the community. So I looked at the NAC program as an opportunity to develop the local economy, to activate the local community, to empower the local residents, and to serve as a resource to the entire corporate community in the region, and of course outside of the region as well. So we think that this is a good model. The model of developing a collaborative that actually collaborates and works with the city and works with the region to develop develop meaningful employment, to develop economic growth, to develop and attract new corporations to the region. It's a win-win for everyone. I've got a couple of notes here that I'll talk about what makes for key actions. And in every case, commitment always starts at the top. If the executives are, and the CEO or the executive C-suite is committed to workforce development, to developing a strategic approach that aligns with corporate requirements and corporate value, nothing can stop that impetus, because that commitment, when it starts from the top, to have a commitment to security, to have a commitment to diversity, if it starts at the top, it's likely to be successful. We should all set these, another step is to set measurable security goals. Things that you can accomplish in time and over time. Also at the same time, preparing for that next event, getting the council or getting the broad understanding of what event can happen and how can you protect your organization and your corporation from that event. Engage external and internal talent assessment processes. And also, when it comes to diversity and engaging in diversity, it would be good to have a diverse set of support, so that at the end of the day, you're addressing and eliminating unconscious biases, but also you're having a broader conversation with a broader group of individuals, which brings a lot of nuanced and new thought process to the table. Excuse me. So what can we do, right? Slow down and be intentional about our security and diversity decision making. Slow down and be intentional about our security and diversity decision making. It's real clear that having a effective workforce planning approach gives you real insight into your organization, real insight into how you're creating business, real insight into what your business approach is, and real insight as to how to protect yourself and your organization from future challenges, future events. We never know when another COVID is coming, but we never know what the next event is coming. But being properly prepared as best as possible gives us the best flexibility to make adjustments on the fly and be positioned properly to defend and to thrive while we're defending. Always include diverse perspectives, set goals and improvements. And of course, you have to be very intentional about all the things that you're doing. Be intentional about building a diverse team. Be intentional about building a security team, and mentor and sponsor diverse talent where you can. Gil, that's pretty much the end of the conversation that I had for you and your team today, and for the attendees today. I'll stop sharing so that we can It looks like I wasn't even sharing this whole time. Apologies, folks, for that. But Gil, am I not here?
You're there, and we could see it was in presentation view, so we got to see all of your wonderful notes included in there too, well. David. But I just wanted to make note that we will, if you'll make that presentation available to me, we'll go ahead and send that out to the participants today as well.
Absolutely.
So they have that full presentation. But thank you for all of the information. We did have a couple of questions in the chat. Gil posted, if we're not necessarily safe and secure yet, when can we actually say that we're safe?
Wow.
That's a big question.
Yeah, it is a big question, but the answer is one that I've heard from and spoke with other colleagues about, is that we're not there yet. We're not likely to be there for a while, because if we covered 1,000 holes, one of those holes had a breach to it, or had one of those holes had a vulnerability to it, then we're likely to be breached. So when do we get to the point that we're safe? Well, when we're upstream and downstream, we've applied all of the standards, security metrics, and guidelines upstream and downstream. There are still processes and plans and groups upstream that haven't applied security. There are groups downstream that haven't applied security. So it has to be a broad-based approach of applying security guidelines and metrics upstream and downstream, so that you can really say and see that you're closer to security. But it's going to be a long run. It's going to be a long road, and we're not going to get there. We're just not going to get there anytime soon.
Thanks, Dave. Let me see. There was another question, but you answered it throughout the rest of your presentation. But maybe you could. I love your the Newark Anchor Collaborative as an example. You were talking about alignment. Along those lines, maybe could you elaborate a little bit on the alignment of industry and cyber workforce strategies? Because I know we've got some of our local companies and industries that are tuning in, and we're going to make this presentation available to them as well.
Right. So aligning industry and workforce strategies always comes back to the point of, what is it that you do for your business? How do you protect those? How do you protect that? How do you protect your crown jewels? How do you protect your intellectual property? How do you protect your industry advantage? How do you protect all of that? And in doing that, in creating that protective model, how do you find the right talent and the right team to do that? It's not as easy as we all thought it is and should be. We're very clear that most of the talent coming out of the training facilities are not meeting the requirements, are not meeting the business requirements, are not meeting the technology requirements. They're just not meeting the requirements as industry needs them. So making that adjustment or that connection between the business needs and that strategic workforce, it becomes an imperative. And we've got to do a better job of training, right? We've got to do a better job of training, which is something that you guys are focusing on at KerrEDC.
So for those of our independent school districts that are represented on today's call, you've talked about that alignment. And obviously what we're doing as an EDC to try to align the industry with the workforce is there some other kind of partnership or some other collaboration aside from the industry and maybe our EDC, as well as those independent school districts and colleges, that we can be doing to get the word out about the demand for this particular sector, like the IT and the cybersecurity sector?
Are there other things that we can do to illuminate or create the demand? Am I understanding that correctly?
No, help those kids that are still in school, help the ones that are maybe coming out of college, help our general workforce that we're looking to upskill. We know that there's been a lot of people that have been displaced. How do we, aside from the work that we're doing right now on this call, how is it that we're able to get that information out to let them know that this is really an in-demand occupation and training is available outside of maybe what they might be getting in other areas?
So there was a young lady on the call today from one of the ISDs that works with PTech, right? They have a PTech sort of installation. PTech's a great tool for advancing the clarion call about the need for advanced education, advanced technology, advanced skills, advanced learning. I'm working with an organization in Brooklyn, the area that I'm from, that's really focused on saturating their communities and their schools with events that speak to not only the academics, but this new level of requirement and training. They've been doing community events, and at those community events, they've been doing outreach and gathering the children from K through 12, especially junior high school and high school, because that's the sort of the next wave that's immediately coming out. And they've been taking them through training programs, taking them through entrepreneurial programs, internship programs, the whole and just bringing them into like NYU and then taking them through a whole resource training and showing them in mass numbers what is happening in the community around them that they're just not seeing. And it's really interesting that in some of these underserved and marginalized communities, you're going to find some real gems and some real talent, but you have to spend your time going into that community, doing the outreach that we've been doing, especially in the cities like the city of Richmond, Virginia, just doing some deep outreach into the community and into the corporate community, and getting that alignment between corporations to reach into the community and find those folks that are not seeing this as a viable opportunity. And it's tough, right? It's tough. We're all busy and distracted with other things, but if we plan to make a real change or plan to make a real dent in its workforce and business alignment, then we've got to make the time and take the time to do it.
So Mindy, I know you turned your camera back on, but I don't know if you want to ask your question or if you would just want me to read it from in the chat for David.
I have a problem asking.
Okay.
So we are offering in our PTech programs, are an Associate of Applied Science Information Technology Specialist, both the certificate level and the degree. But some of the things that you touched on today, especially looking at the need to have not just the trained talent, but really that communication ability, the team working ability. What can we do to ensure that our students are well-rounded to meet those needs beyond just that degree program? And then the second layer actually that comes up for me as a question based off of what you just mentioned is, for me, not being a cybersecurity person myself, we have our couple of obvious in the area where we can directly see the connection and the need, but I don't really know how to begin to, where do I start on getting involved with other companies and things that might actually have this need to ensure our students can meet those needs as well, that I just don't even know where to begin, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I'd love to have a sidebar conversation with you, but let me start here. The conversation that we're having today is indicative of what we call an industry roundtable. I know moving forward, Gilberto and Teresa and I are going to be having conversations with some of the local corporations to really identify what's missing and what's needed. That kind of ability to ask the question and get the right answer is critical, because if you don't know what you don't know, then you can't train to meet that qualification. You can't train to meet their needs. What we've seen is that, how do I say this? Educational institutions are huge, and they're like a big ship that is not able to always shift on a dime and just be agile and flexible, because what they're doing is they're training to a particular standard. And that's great, but the standard sometimes doesn't meet the granularity that an industry partner needs. An industry partner may need you to do 4 or 5 things specifically, and your program may train at a macro level, but then there's the micro missing, which is why KerrEDC and I are just talking about this last mile training, this last mile polishing that allows organizations like yours to collaborate with the EDC to do that last mile training. And that last mile training is representative of what corporations are asking for specifically. So those programs are built to train. They're informed by security practitioners, delivered by security practitioners. It's almost the McDonald's or Burger King, have it your way. One of those two guys, right? And the other thing is that it's great that your organization provides those certifications and the associate's degree. Being well-rounded, if I remember the question correctly, being well-rounded or having a well-rounded approach is a factor of, again, collaborating with all of those institutions and organizations that you're a partner with. It's really a competition that I'd like to have sort of offline with you, if that makes sense for you as well.
It does, and I would really appreciate that opportunity, because this particular program is just an example of one of the ones that we have. But I know that we have a limited group of partners that we are directly connected with to get this program started. But I know that we're missing the boat on, we could expand those partnerships and really meet a broader need in our community. I just would love some direction on how I can plug that in.
Gilberto and Teresa is a good starting point. Their entrepreneurial center is going to be an amazing sort of focus in the community of developing the skills and gathering all of the partners, the community partners from around the entire region and outside of the region, bringing them all into a conversation that gives you an opportunity to really address the corporation needs or the economic development needs. And in doing that, really supports the industry, the region itself. The economic developers, the corporations are creating the opportunities and providing them with the resources and services that they need. It only makes sense. It really only makes sense.
Thanks, Dave. And Mindy, I'll also come back to your question. You were asking about, where do we begin? It's actually in these kinds of roundtable discussions. Typically, we would have them in person, but here we are today. So being able to have access to some of those companies, whether they're local or they're at state or national presence, and then having access to some of these experts, such as David today. So where do we begin? It's exactly what we're doing today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Good.
Okay, I think
more questions, or are we at our time?
We are at our time, but I think if there's somebody else that wants to ask something else, most definitely, and then we'll wrap it up. And if there's no other questions, is there a question?
I think Sonia has one.
Okay.
Nope, she's just saying thank you, David, and that's for being a partner and working with workforce initiatives. And I just want to take a moment to say thank you to everybody that's been on the call today. We really appreciate everybody making this first step. Although it's always nice to be able to be in person. We had some great people from around the nation that probably wouldn't have been able to attend in person otherwise. So David, we'll make sure that everybody has your contact information, and so we can continue those conversations. Gilbert, if you have anything.
No, I mean, again, thanks for participating. And if hopefully soon we're able to, do this in person, we typically give away some wine bottles because we have our roundtable industry meetings at the one of the local wineries. Just a little incentive for people to come out, in addition to the content, of course, So, all right. Well, everybody, thank you, David. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gil. Thank you. Thank you to the EDC, and thank you to your city shareholders that were in attendance. Really appreciated the opportunity to speak to you today.
All right. Fantastic. So everybody, thanks, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.